I'm a professional singer, and I think the reason that Stephanie is so intrigued by me is that I have my music degree, my bachelor's of music degree in theory and composition, which I got way back when. And then I went on, instead of becoming a film composer, as my original intent was, when I got into Los Angeles, the singing career took off instead.
There is another reason that I am so intrigued by you, and that is really your claim to fame, which just makes me weak kneed. Because I have boys. So of course, sci-fi is what they were raised on. So I had heard your voice so many times before I ever realized that it was you. And when I met you, it was just, I became a fangirl. But yeah, can you tell everyone about what I'm referring to?
Yes, I was honored to be the person who did the re-recording, and this was a referral job, by the way. This wasn't an audition. I'd worked enough in the town that the
Wow.
people who were doing this, they just called me and said, "Hey, can you do this? We're doing a sci-fi thing," and I went, "Okay, sure." And I had been I've been a Star Trek fan since high school, so I've watched every episode multiple times.
Mhm.
So when I was asked to do this, I dropped the phone and then picked it up again and said, "Sure, what time would you like me?" And I was in there with the orchestra, and it was extraordinary. And if you go to my website, you can still see the little video they did where I'm in the booth and the orchestra's playing and the conductor's talking about re-recording the original theme for the Star Trek that first aired in the 60s.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Play. And now you're singing. Jimmy Master.
And they did a whole HD version of it and re-recorded the theme. So I got to do the singing on it. And so I went back and I studied more in detail, because of course I'd heard it a billion times too, but what the original singer had done, so I could really match all of the different kinds of nuances that she'd given to the performance. And I had in, in high school, I handmade tribbles, and I brought them. I still have them, and I put them in the studio when I was singing. So that's how much of a geek I am. Uh,
That's awesome.
and I've done something since, like an anime thing called Blood Plus. I did a diva song on that I get some fan mail from.
Uh-huh.
And then I did some work on the show Glee. Not the song so much, but all the background music. I'm in the little 5-voice group that did that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I've had an a cappella group that did 3 CDs names called Sixth Wave. We're pretty much out of print now, but I think you can find stuff. But yeah, so my experience is different, and did full-on opera roles in small companies. So I've had quite a diverse experience as a singer. And
Yeah.
being a session singer in Hollywood, even though I'm basically retired, I moved to be closer to family, and then just I'm letting that fade out. And moving on to other things in my life. But it's just been such a pleasure to work with this high level of people who understand music.
Mhm.
So I pursued both an operatic career and a classical choral career, and then I got into session singing. So it all kind of melded together. An extraordinary experience. I'm very, very blessed. I've been doing what I've been doing. Yeah. And
Yes.
Star Trek was a really wonderful part of that.
Uh-huh. Yes. Well, and I'm very impressed by all your accomplishments, not just that one. I swear, I promise. But yeah, that one too. So can you tell me exactly what your degree in music is in?
It is in music theory and composition, and I got a bachelor's degree in that
Okay,
because I had become a film composer. So I did study theory and composition, as it were. Yeah, and I
nice.
did write a few things, but not a whole lot. I have a couple of pieces published that I wrote for marimba because I was dating a marimbist in college.
Oh, that I know how that works. Yes.
And some vocal arrangements that I'd done with Six Waver published. So, but not a whole lot. It hasn't been the huge focus, but the study of music theory it was fascinating and inhibiting at the same time, because if you learn too much about how things are constructed, it was hard for me to get beyond that to then just let myself be creative with it. So, but I still love looking at it. I hadn't looked at it. Obviously, we are not taught the things that your book discusses to any great degree.
My book is obviously kind of covering some new ground. I've only been able to chat with a few people who have expertise in music theory and composition and tuning.
Mhm.
I've talked to a few, and I mostly just get blank stares from people who never ever really return my emails again after that. And I sort of get that because what I'm saying is kind of out there. I think a lot of people just don't really want to put their own reputations on the line and say, yeah, that sounds plausible, or no, it doesn't, because they're just not really sure how this is all going to shake down.
I found it utterly fascinating. I'm seeing actually the integration of everything across the board, just like you're seeing how music theory applies to things like electricity
Uh-huh.
and and science and philosophy, and when you take a step as a musician, you know there's more to what you're doing than notes on the page, and even what you're expressing emotionally. You know there's a connection to the creator,
Mhm.
and especially when you're singing things written by Bach,
Yeah.
you are these people, Handel, Mozart, all these wonderful people, Verdi, the people I've had the pleasure of singing, and even people that aren't directly, so him singing gospel music, and even stuff that's not directly related to worship. There's something about music that is integral from a breathing standpoint, from a mental standpoint, from so the fact that the numbers add up is just kind of another aspect to what, as a musician, I have perceived in my
Right.
life. So
Yeah.
this is just kind of fascinating to see, wow, this is all works together. It's part of the whole grand design, but also understanding things like the Fibonacci series and the golden section and how that works in how plants grow, and how really the best music is designed around these natural formations. Then
Mhm.
it just all kind of makes sense to come together. And so applying it across the board, why not? It can't, it doesn't seem to be like you're going down any weird rabbit holes. You're kind of exploring the connections between things, and and why things are connected that way too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why we perceive things then differently than kind of like, well, I thought it would be this, and then you realize it's not. Yeah, there's so much more that we are learning that we realize if we take a step back. And there are a lot of gaps in our education, because I never learned anything about phantom notes or tuning. This is other than 440, you just take it at face value and you go with that. Working in a cappella groups and in choirs, so as a singer, you're not chained to tempered tuning, although you end up being chained to tempered tuning because everybody else is. But when
Right.
you're singing a cappella, there are times when that group will tune something that just goes and
Yeah.
it's not tempered, but you can't put your finger on it because it is so subtle. And when you're tuning these intervals with people that are singing, you know you're not doing a temper tuning and the chords lining up differently, but it's something that you hear and experience rather than evaluate from a left brain standpoint.
Yeah,
So-
exactly. Well, and have you ever experienced in a cappella singing that phenomenon of pitch drift where everyone kind of over time goes slightly sharp?
I've had the opposite experience.
Oh,
where
really?
Sing and tend to sing flat,
Ah,
mostly because we're just not breathing and supporting. And since I've more recently thought about the 432 as opposed to 440 tuning, I've been curious, but I have no idea if this is even true. If singers are naturally gravitating towards 432 and
Yeah.
that doesn't go flatter than flat. It doesn't keep going flat. It just sinks a little underneath the pitch that we're going to 440, it's 440, ding, 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 you know, and it
Wow.
just kind of hangs a little. And I'm wondering, yeah,
That's
every once in
fascinating.
a while it'll drift sharp, but not usually.
Well, and that's really
People hanging-
interesting. That is really
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
I'd like to see if maybe there's some exploration to do that. It just occurred to me more recently, so I haven't had any opportunity to play with that. And of course, my piano's tuned to 440 and my pitch pipe's tuned to 440. And
Yeah.
I've spent decades singing in 440. So I took a little online test about whether or not I could tell the difference between 440 and 432 and what I liked.
Mhm.
And 2 out of 3, I could tell the difference. I could hear the difference, obviously, but I liked 440 better than 432 2 out of 3 times, which
Oh,
is
really?
in the 4 examples. Yeah, it was interesting. And I think that's because I'm accustomed to it. I'm used to hearing how the overtones line up at 440, how it sounds in my voice, how it feels in my body. So it's just been kind of, it's like the training. And I think there's uses for both of it at this point. 440, I think, should still have its purposes because it's all music,
Right.
and 432 also. But
Yeah, I think so too. I don't see any reason why we can't, just be inclusive and, and
Yeah.
use all the things that work.
Right.
There are definitely things about equal temperament that irritate me and make me upset. But I also can recognize the genius behind it and the math that these different theorists have come up with to make it happen is astounding. It was an astounding achievement. And
Yeah.
so I certainly wouldn't want to discount that or even just throw it out entirely. But there are times for that. And then there are times for, something else.
Yeah. Well, the whole integration and being able to tune huge groups of people together is where it's incredibly functional and practical. And you could tune everything down to 432, or up to 444 even. You may be hearing choirs that are gravitating towards that another pitch, but at 444 is another one of those resonant frequencies that's a healing frequency. So that may be what you're hearing too. So there may be both, pulling, and 440 has been kind of one of those things in the middle. Yeah, but it's also part of in your book, you're discussing a difference between this is fascinating to me, that the melody versus harmony. And one of the things that we were not taught in school, because I don't think we know how to do it, is how to write a Bach fugue, where he wrote independent melodies. A lot of people who did this too, wasn't the only one either, or a Palestrina, or people who wrote things that were seriously melodic and the melodies wove in between each other and there was no harmony per se, but the melodies worked together. And that's not something we're trained to do. We're trained in harmony and rhythm with a little melodic on top,
Right.
with the different structure. But having the ability to weave melodies together is something completely, it's kind of like building those old Tartarian buildings that we're wondering about, star forts, it's like, who built this? How did they do the fugues? How did Bach do this? So there's some knowledge that we haven't quite gotten to yet. It's available, but we're going to have to dig back in and figure out how to do this again.
Right.
Using melody as opposed to harmony, but then your juxtaposition to the fact that our societies are driven towards groupthink as opposed to individuality. and music is part of that programming. And well, I could go way down that rabbit hole in a number of ways.
Yeah.
But now that I've kind of looked further into that, but the advantage of being a classical musician is that I've always been in that more esoteric, original, higher minded music. And there's an advantage to that, so you can see both, So
Well, and I'm wondering, and I'm not a music theorist, I'm not a composer. I played a little as a teenager. That's as far as I went. And in my defense, the reason that I stopped is because pianos sound horrible to me, and that was my main instrument. But they sound awful. They always have sounded terribly out of tune. And so I just, I got involved
the
in
honky tonk bars are off no honky tonk bars for you. That's just can't.
It's actually a joke with at my work. They know no piano music coming in on our speaker system, and definitely no honky tonk.
Oh, that's so funny. There's good and bad. When I hear solo piano music, it's interesting. It tends to feel depressing to me lately. Solo piano music, even if it's really beautiful, unless it's used for really different kind of upbeat jazz or something like that. But if I try to hear, spa piano music, it's not, there's something, I think we're feeling something similar. It's not really working, but it can be when you hear a piano played like an orchestra, like in front of a symphony in a concerto. Whoa, baby, that's what it's for. That's what the tempered tuning is for. And it picks up all the overtones of everything else in the room. And of course, this is a blanket statement too. There are people who play solo piano who are just, it can be extraordinary. When you hear, for example, jazz pianists like Mary McPartland, an old jazz pianist from way back, or people who use it for different purposes, it's different than sitting down and trying to play Bach or Mozart on the piano, because those pieces aren't designed for tempered tuning necessarily, or orchestral pieces that are played on the piano. They're a little more challenging. They have their purposes too, but
well, and it's that whole public versus individual thing. When you have a beautiful symphony and 100-piece ensemble working together, that is its own beauty. But if you're just talking about the way that a certain frequency can be ascended to by one vocalist and they hit and it sends shivers down your body, that's an individual experience, and that's a different experience, and we should really have both of them.
Yeah. Indeed. It depends what kind of piano you're playing too. If you're playing a really top of the line Bösendorfer, you're gonna have a different experience than you're gonna do with a Spinet in your living room.
That's true. and that could be why it was so grating to me, because I played a Spinet.
Yeah, and that's what I have. I have my mom's Spinet, but it has a certain lovely charm to it too, even though it's tuned, but it's not in tune, and I don't care because it's the connection to my mom,
Right.
that I have.
In my book, discuss the fact that there are these 4 extra tones between harmonics 16 and 32 in the series. And I am just super curious to know from you as a music theorist, what do you make of these 4 tones?
Well, I've looked at them a little bit. Your book introduced me to them, so they're a brand new idea. And I was kind of wondering, I looked at one of your videos where you're looking at the circle where the tempered tuning and the supposed geometric patterns, but the way it's laid out, and the 4 extra notes are kind of off. They're kind of in one side. So they must have been kind of brushed aside to accommodate the tempered tuning, which are not really quite on the geometrical frequencies anyway, right? They're kind of in between. Everything we use is kind of in between.
Yep.
And for some reason they picked 12 as opposed to 16, probably for spiritual reasons, because we have 12 signs of the zodiac, we have 12 apostles, we have 12, so there's a big reason for the number 12. And so they kind of made that work. And also, I think the spacing of the intervals is different as you go up and down. So it's not even though it's well tempered, it's not even tempered tuning. So it kind of smushes some of these things out. But looking at the pure mathematics of it is fascinating. It would be really interesting to sing in the 16 note even scale at some point, which I haven't gotten to yet. If I set up my own recording equipment, I might play and get a tuner that can do it. It might be interesting to play with tuning to myself with chords on that to see if that even works.
Mhm.
It may be really foreign, or it may be just kind of not as functional as we think it could be. I don't know. It depends on how the harmonics kind of work. But also working as a single singer might be different than working as a group of people. But I think it's fascinating that you can certainly find them, and they're there, and they're part of the harmonic series. It may be something that we perceive, I'm just riffing on my own mind here, but
Mhm.
something that we perceive in the upper overtones, because we did study enough of the overtone series to know that as you get in the upper overtones, the things that are resonating up there are not in tune with the notes that we would play up there. I'm sorry, I'm putting my hands way out from the, they're not in tune with the notes you play on the piano, the overtone. You know, so if you play a low C and then you can hear the way overtones of the upper B flat or something like that, or the E's way up there, they're
Mhm.
not the same as on the keyboard that you would play. So it could be that we are perceiving these phantom notes, but only maybe in the upper overtones. My experience with overtones was so extraordinary. I was working with an a cappella choir in a very resident church, and we were doing this wonderful piece by, I think it was Arnold Bax, where at one point, it kind of repeated itself, but at one point there was a C chord that goes boom with the whole choir doing it. And I was the only person holding the high C. If the choir was in tune, I didn't need to sing that note because the overtone was so resonant, you could hear it without me singing it. If the choir was not in tune, I could not sing it because I could not find the note because the overtones were so messed up there. So when you're singing really high in a group of people, I was always writing the overtones and tuning to the overtones in things too, in a room. And that was an extraordinary experience to realize that if you're in tune, you hear it all. And that was with an a cappella group that was probably when it was not so tempered, the tuning, and it locked in, that overtone was, and when they weren't quite in tune, it was like, I can't have to let it go because I couldn't find it, would not work. So there's something to the overtones that we perceive that may be part of what the phantom notes are really more about maybe at this point.
Well, and one thing too that was very confusing when I first stumbled on these is that if you look, so I was looking just at the harmonic frequencies and saying, oh, okay, well, we've got this one that we're not acknowledging, at least nowhere I can find on the internet.
Yeah,
so it doesn't exist. And so that was the very first phantom note, which falls right after F sharp.
Okay.
So F sharp is harmonic 22. That's what we're all told in Wikipedia anyway. Okay. And then harmonic 23 doesn't really exist as a note. Sometimes they'll tack it on to F sharp, but they'll tell you that if you're going to generate harmonics and you're wanting to generate an F sharp, you go for harmonic 11, which is the next octave is 22. And yet when I was looking one day at unequally tempered list of frequencies, F sharp is sitting there. Well, it's a couple octaves higher because we don't go down that low, but it's sitting there actually in a position that is right around this note of W rather than the F sharp that we're told, which is based on harmonic 11. And so we actually, this phantom note that supposedly doesn't exist is actually the one that we're using, or more closely, that we are more closely tuned to than the real F sharp. And I think that was part of the conspiracy part of the story, that Francis Bacon was using his little breadcrumbs to kind of lead us to discover. And I'm still, digging into his world and finding fascinating things.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so I'm almost wondering if we don't already use all four of these notes and we just don't realize it.
You know, that's very possible because I think I'd suggested to the idea of the blue note in
Oh.
jazz.
Yeah.
Part of that, because you're detuning it slightly. And of course, in the C scale, the F sharp is the tritone, and you do tune it differently depending on where it's leading. And the same thing with the leading tones, up, down. You know, you were talking about B flat in one of your presentations, or your question to me about B flat.
Right.
So in a really blue tone, you're gonna tune it a little bit lower, or higher or something, or the blue version of the minor third, or the flat sixth. So I'd have to see where those are on the scale because I don't have it in front of me. But we could be using those and hearing those in how we tune. Also, if you're tuning chords as you change key centers in a piece, then you're going to be using versions of these notes that are there or close to it.
Yeah.
They may not even be so defined that they have to lock into that particular phantom note, but we do use versions of different tunings to accomplish different things in music, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it could be, like I said, more available as the overtones in the upper octaves resonate, as opposed to hitting them right in that 16 to 32 range, maybe where we hear more functionality for it. I don't know. It's totally speculation on my part. But.
Yeah. Well, that's where we're at right now. A little bit speculating, but hey, it's good for the soul.
Oh, exactly. And it's fun. It'd be fun to play with this a little more, like I said, or maybe discover where we can find them somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I used to be a first soprano when I was young, and then now I guess I'm an alto. If anything, I'm not a singer. I can't sing. I'm not at all. But I played the piano for the choir. So of course I was a member of the choir by default, and I was a first soprano because that's where I could, make my sounds. And now, no way.
You'd be
I have
surprised.
this very low voice now. So I guess it's just age.
Well, speaking from vocal technique, it's because of where we speak. We don't speak in the resonance. You'll hear singers, you'll hear opera singers walking around going, yes, I'm speaking in my mask, in my resonance right there, because you're keeping it off. And a lot of us, especially in American speech, we sit on our vocal cords. So we tend to compress them. And so and also things get a little flabby as you get older. But that's kind of part of it. But if you did some vocal exercises, I think you'd be surprised
Oh,
how that would work. Maybe not.
well, I would.
You never know.
I would be very surprised, but it would make me feel young if I could suddenly sing with the radio, with the women instead of the men.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Stephanie. Don't take any wooden nickels. Unless you want to.
I'm grateful for any feedback. Please leave your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching.